Start recording.
Oh,
What's that, Dave?
I was just going to say, this is the part where Jill used to get really stressed out with starting the recording, because then you have to be serious because it's on record.
Put on our serious faces. All right. Well, we'll get started here. Welcome all. Thanks for joining. For folks that weren't here for the last meeting or for the one before that, I'm Eric Thompson. I work for Move Minnesota, and Move Minnesota will be hosting these calls for the foreseeable future. This is my first time hosting such a big Zoom call, so bear with me. But I put the schedule for today's meeting in the chat. So we've got a legislative update from Suzanne, and I'll let Suzanne introduce herself. We've got an update from MnDOT from Dave. Alta is going to be doing some engagement with us on kind of developing better equity tools for implementing safe routes to school. And then we're going to have some breakout rooms for kind of like a short chat with, I think we just have like 3 questions, and hopefully we'll have enough time to come back and kind of discuss. But if not, hopefully we can just come back and share what we had in the chat so that we'll know where everyone else is at. So with all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Suzanne to give us a pretty cool legislative update. And Suzanne, please tell them all about yourself.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Good morning, everyone. My name is Suzanne Sobotka. I am the Policy and Research Director at Move Minnesota, which is a relatively new role for me. I just started at the end of March. Prior to that, I was the Transportation Policy Advisor for Governor Walz. And prior to that, I spent 6 years at the Minnesota Senate, 5 of which I staffed the Transportation Committee in some capacity. So it is great to be here. I have been involved with safe routes to school on the policy side, and less so on the actual boots on the ground side of people making that good work happen. So session wrapped up in full just yesterday. The Senate stayed in session a little bit longer than the House to take up some commissioner confirmations, but the session wrapped up with a full budget and no government shutdown. All of the agencies were funded for the work that they do, and programs that will go out to benefit Minnesotans. And some good news within the transportation bill was that Safe Routes to School received $5 million in general fund cash over their usual operating budget, which is a significant investment in safe routes compared to what you get year over year. And also the fact that it is cash and not bonding dollars provides some additional flexibility that I won't get too in the weeds on, because I'm sure Dave would correct me anyway. And perhaps he'll have more to say about that after I wrap up. In total, there were a lot of good active transportation investments on top of Safe Routes to School in that bill. There was an additional $5 million for the active transportation account at MnDOT, which is the first time this has ever been funded. The account was created in 2017 and has sat as a placeholder ever since. And again, that's cash. So that's money that MnDOT can use for our infrastructure, programming, and that's money that's available over the next 2 years. It's not an ongoing appropriation, which is unfortunate, but we do have a great opportunity before us to show what we can do with $5 million going forward every year, and really try to make the case for funding the never-ending list of proposals that are submitted to MnDOT. With that, I can be open for questions about other aspects of the bill. There's great stuff for transit in there. No cuts to Greater Minnesota Transit or Metro Transit. There's lots of funding for roads. I will also be happy to pop my email address in the chat in case any of you had further questions later or just want to get in touch.
Great. Thanks so much, Suzanne. Any questions here, Pat?
So this is provincial on my part, but as is the case with many people on this Zoom call, I'm involved with the Statewide Health Improvement Partnership, or SHIP. And somebody on this Zoom call, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe SHIP got $35 million for the biennium. Is that correct?
If someone else on here knows, please speak up. I don't work in the Health and Human Services area at all.
Sure. it is relevant to transportation because a lot of us ship people around the state are working on safe routes to school and active transportation and other things like that. So
Sure.
I'm gonna interpret the silence as agreement that yes, we got $35 million for the biennium. So if somebody realizes that I'm wrong on that, say something in the chat. So, but thank you.
I will, I'll stick around for a little bit. I do know how to read a spreadsheet. So let me see if I can look at the Health and Human Services spreadsheet and confirm that.
Thank you.
It's Julie from Minneapolis Public Schools. I just had a question, Suzanne, regarding the really exciting news, the 5 million in the Active Transportation Fund. Will you just remind me if the Active Transportation Fund is specific to safe routes to school, or is it broader and includes kind of all types of transportation?
It's broader. My old boss, Senator Dibble, and I used to refer to it as safe routes for everyone. Since legislators really seem to love the safe routes branding, that is statewide and for any sort of walking, biking, rolling, non-motor vehicle transportation.
And that's in addition to the 5 million for safe routes to school.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that is totally separate.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, again, Suzanne will leave her email in the chat. And if you have more, you feel free to reach out. But yeah, thanks so much, Suzanne, for that update. And that will pass it over to Dave.
I think I can tag along here on what Suzanne had to offer in terms of some of the legislative decision making that happened. First of all, in the time that I've been here, at least, we have not had this much money allocated for safe routes to school. So I think that that's a pretty, impressive outcome of the legislative session. I'm pretty excited about it. I know a lot of my colleagues here at MnDOT are excited about this opportunity, particularly with the active transportation program, which we have eagerly been waiting for funding to fall into that program so that we could start looking at a broader safe routes to everyone approach. But the news is still somewhat new to us. And so we're doing a little bit of work internally to understand how this will impact solicitations as early as this fall. So you all remember maybe a month or two ago, we were talking about funding that was available. We had $3 million from last year that we were preparing to solicit for infrastructure projects in the fall. We also have our transportation alternative solicitation that has been annual. And there's still a possibility that there will be additional safe routes to school dollars in the bonding bill, which is yet to come. But I do know that there has been some agreement on a number for safe routes to school projects in the bonding bill. So really it puts us in a place where we've had quite a bit more money than we've had ever for active transportation and safe routes to school. I know that all of you are many of you are halfway on summer break and joined us anyway, so thanks for that. And others of you are probably thinking, well, what should I be looking for in the future for the communities that I'm working with? And so I did want to give you a little bit of a heads up of, I can't give you exact numbers. I can tell you that in our current conversations, we're expecting to hold an annual planning solicitation as we have every year. We're planning to hold a boost grant solicitation this fall. We will hold a state-funded infrastructure solicitation that will have higher limits and lower, I guess the range is going to be lower and higher than it's ever been in the past for the state safe routes to school funds. And we're looking at potentially having solicitations that would fund additional engineering studies. So some of you were able to participate in that in the last round, as well as looking to fund additional safe routes to school coordinators in the state. Those are not solid yet, so I'm hesitant to say that that's exactly what's happening, but I know that it's July, and we usually hold our solicitations in October, and a lot of you are probably with the summer break having an opportunity to think about like how you can support safe routes to school in the communities you work with. The place to watch for that, of course, is all of our, as we know more, we will certainly be on this call talking about it. We'll be sharing that through e-news and Facebook. The grants opportunities on the MnDOT website, I can drop the link here for everybody to take a look. But also, if you're working more than one community, if you're a SHIP coordinator, or maybe you're a district safe routes to school coordinator and you're trying to think about what would make the most impactful application. There's obviously, each of those applications is a little bit different, but I do want to make sure that folks are looking at and using the student transportation equity for priority population tool to think about what school might do the best in our application process. If you have 10 or 20 or 5, whatever to choose from, this tool and the equity score that is going to be a part of all of these applications can impact how well your application does. And so understanding how it might impact the different schools you work with might help you in your decision-making process and maybe some of your strategy around applying for Safe Routes to School funds this round. The other thing that you could be doing right now after you've done that is if you're in a community that has multiple Safe Routes to School plans, right about now is the time to start kind of rallying folks that have been involved in those Safe Routes plans. I know that we have having more funding than we've ever had before. Yes, we expect demand to be there, but we also really want to get the word out. And so, we'll be reaching out to the various communities that have completed Safe Routes to School plans to let them know that the funds are available, to start looking through their plans and pulling out those priorities that maybe haven't been funded yet to consider for an application for state Safe Routes to School dollars. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has them.
Dave, this is Jason Walker. Hey, I'm just curious, how are you thinking about preliminarily reallocate or allocating these new funds? Are you going to spread it out over infrastructure and planning and boost and all those things? Is more of it going to go into the next year since you already have quite a bit allocated this year already for that? Or how are you thinking about where you'd like it to go?
Good question, Jason. This is all preliminary, so I'm gonna go out on a limb here and tell you what I'm thinking, and then let you know that there's a lot of people at MnDOT. So we have conversations and land different places sometimes. So the original Safe Routes to School federal legislation suggested that you spend somewhere between 10 and 30% of total funds on non-infrastructure activities. So you can expect that we will be aiming for that. And like you mentioned, this is kind of a 2-year window. This is the biennium, and so we'll be looking at how to adequately spread that out between those 2 years and 2 kind of solicitation periods. Does that help, or did I skirt the question entirely?
Yeah, that helps a lot. And also I was thinking, like, as we're going to communities, not only ones that already have plans, but if we're talking to ones that don't have them yet, there's a lot of money there this year. Can we say that next year there also would be the money there?
Sure.
So if they get a planning grant, there's going to be the funds. Because a lot of times big project planning, you need to know that there's not just money this year, but that there's going to be money 2-3 years from now. So
Yeah.
that you can plan adequately for it.
Well, Suzanne kind of touched on this, Jason, and maybe it's a moment to mention. I don't know if it's clear to you, but Safe Routes to School is pretty important to me. And I think there's great work happening all over the state. And I see this influx of funding, this unprecedented influx of funding as a real opportunity for us to show just what we can do with that small amount of money. And really with with every solicitation, with all, with our strategic plan and the implementation of it, I think the story of why, or maybe what we can do with such a small amount of money can help in future legislative sessions as legislators are thinking about how to spend dollars. And I think up until now, we've done a great job of telling the story of what we do. And as Suzanne alluded to, I think the legislature, particularly with safe routes, maybe a little bit less so with active transportation, are fond of the program. So my hope would be that we create enough of impact that it becomes the obvious thing to do to continue to fund each of these pots of money as we move into future years.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Dave. Here.
Hi.
I have a question about, it's hard for many of our communities to hit any equity threshold because of makeup. So I am going to encourage the school district to apply for the boost funding, but they really can't compete when it comes to that equity atlas. Any suggestions?
Absolutely. And this came up on our last round of boost. And what we found in it and what the committee decided, and it is a learning that we applied then and will continue to apply, is that Greater Minnesota has a very different equity score than, say, the metro area, and even pockets of the metro have very different equity scores. And so we wanted to make sure that similar communities were competing with similar communities when it came to the equity score. And so the way that it was broken out with boost last round is I believe it's the League of Minnesota Cities, but it could be another organization, has 4 classifications for the types of cities that are in Minnesota, and it's based on the size of them. And so we use the size of the cities to kind of subdivide all of the applications and then rank those applications against each other. And what that did 2 things. One, like you mentioned, it helped ensure that we were still pursuing our goal of equity, but in a slightly different way. And then it also, kind of an unintended effect of it, ensured that we had a little bit more geographic balance in terms of where we were applying Safe Routes to School dollars throughout the state.
Great, thank you.
And Karen, it's nice to see that you're maybe back in the office. You don't have your picture behind you anymore from when you were hanging out on the couch at home or wherever you were.
No, I'm still hanging out on the couch at home. I just have a blurred background.
Oh, sure.
And actually, I work out of my home all the time. So COVID didn't change anything other than my travel time.
Oh, solid.
Yeah. But Patrick's back in the office.
Hi, Patrick. Any other questions on that? If something occurs to you after this, I'm always available via email. So feel free to shoot me any questions that come up. And also, if you just have insights you want to share on solicitations that you think would be helpful for us as we think about how to allocate these funds, I'd be happy to hear that as well.
Great. Super exciting. I think it's going to really increase the work. I think that's pretty rad. But now we're going to switch gears and we're going to pass it over to Sierra and her team, and we're going to start a different conversation.
Hey, hi, everyone. Thanks for having us once again on the network call. I am going to be sharing my screen here in a second. So let me just get myself organized. Find my Zoom again. There we are. All right, can I get a thumbs up if you're viewing my screen and it is not the presenter slides? Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks everybody. Good to be here. We are going to be spending the next half an hour or so talking about equity in Safe Routes to School as part of the Minnesota Safe Routes to School Strategic Plan Implementation Project. So just a quick overview of what we'll be covering. We want to briefly provide an overview of what we're doing as part of this task for strategic plan implementation. And then I'll hand it over to Kaylin to review really what we're talking about when we're thinking about equity in Safe Routes to School in Minnesota. And then we want to spend the bulk of our time having some smaller group discussions, thinking about work that we're proud of, where we've advocated or steadily pushed for equity in Safe Routes to School planning and implementation, and also thinking about where there have been challenges and where there are needs for additional resources or training or education for practitioners when it comes to incorporating equity in Safe Routes to School. So just a quick overview of what our task is. We just kicked this off at the beginning of June, and we have this project going through the end of October. So we're on a pretty tight timeline. Right now, we're just kicking things off with our best practice and literature review. So we have some ideas about best practices for safe routes equity in Minnesota and across the country, but we're also interested in getting a better sense of what we don't know right now and what the resource needs are locally and across the state. We will be convening an equity work group, which will meet twice between now and October. Dave has shared a list of folks who have expressed interest in being part of that group previously. If you are interested in being part of that group and helping us to develop resources and you haven't already shared your information with Dave, please do so. We'll be reaching out in the next couple of weeks probably to schedule that first work group meeting. And then the bulk of this is really creating and refining Minnesota Safe Routes to School equity resources. And that's pretty intentionally vague at this point. We're really going to be looking to you and other Safe Routes to School practitioners in Minnesota to figure out what the resource needs are, and then figuring out what we can develop within the scope of this project. So looking to you to help us figure out what those resources will look like that we're going to be developing between now and the end of October. So a little bit of background, you guys should all be pretty familiar with the strategic plan update at this point. I think you've gotten updates on it pretty regularly, but generally the last update calls for a much deeper focus on integrating equity and safe routes to school through all E's in terms of how we're engaging folks, how projects are being funded, also how planning is happening and how projects are being implemented. And really, we want to be developing tools for a more equitable program that improves not only participation, but also outcomes and representation for priority populations. And when we're talking about priority populations, we're thinking about people and groups who have been historically excluded from the planning process, who are underrepresented in the planning process, who are more likely to rely on walking or biking or transit to get to destinations, including schools, and also folks that are more likely to experience a disproportionate burden of, I guess, the negative planning outcomes, things like health and transportation and access to opportunities. So we're interested in developing tools to create more equitable outcomes that really serve those priority groups. Before I hand it off to Kaylin, I guess I'll give Dave a chance real quick if there's anything else you want to share about background to set the stage for our discussion.
No, you nailed it, Sierra. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. All right, Kaylin, I'll hand it off to you and I can keep running slides here.
Great, thank you. Well, good morning all. My name is Kaylin Henley. I use she or they pronouns and I'm a senior planner at Alta. Thanks again for having us today. So before we dig into discussions, I want to revisit what we mean by equity and safe routes to school. And as Sierra mentioned, you all are probably very familiar with the strategic plan and the definitions outlined there, but I think it's important just to have a shared understanding or shared vocabulary before we dig into discussions. So as defined in the strategic plan, equity in safe routes means that every student is able to safely, comfortably, and conveniently walk and bike to school, regardless of race, cultural identity, tribal affiliation, immigrant or refugee status, language, gender or sexual identity, income, religion, and whether or not a student receives special education or has a physical or mental disability or is houseless or highly mobile. So an equity approach requires working with local partners to tailor programs and allocate resources to meet the unique needs of the community. So with that definition, let's kind of shift to the next slide. And what this means for the Minnesota Safe Routes to School program, as Sierra kind of mentioned about planning, is, in that strategic plan, it outlined efforts to really elevate equity and push equitable strategies forward. As noted in the plan, the program team is striving to achieve equitable outcomes by developing and distributing tools, resources, and funding in a way that centers equity. And what does that mean? So centering equity, it means prioritizing communities who are more likely to rely on walking or biking for transportation, are more vulnerable to unsafe traffic conditions, or have experienced historic disinvestment. That's just reiterating what Sierra just said as well. So with that those shared definitions and grounding, which I'm sure you all were already very familiar with, but thank you for taking that time. We're going to move into discussion groups. So it's going to be about 20 minutes or the remaining of the time. And we'll circle back though together before leaving. So we won't just exit from our discussion groups, but it's about 20 minutes. We're going to have two sets of questions, one that's going to be focusing on successes and one that's focusing on challenges. And this is going to give us some additional insight into how can we really start to direct and hone and guide those resources that Sierra was talking about. We'll have facilitators. So Dave, Sierra, myself, Eric, if we have enough folks, which I think we do. And bye, Julie. And just know that, the discussion groups aren't being recorded, but we'll have note takers just so we can all share our notes back with each other to help develop those resources. Okay, so Sierra, anything else, Sierra or Dave, anything else before we break into discussion groups?
I don't think I have anything. Eric, were you able to set those breakout groups up? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm just moving us around a little bit to make sure that
Okay,
we've
great.
got everybody.
Cool. So maybe while Eric is doing that, I'll just do a quick preview of some of the discussion questions so you can start thinking about that. And your facilitators will have these questions on hand as well. So we want to start out by thinking about some of our successes and what's working well. So an effort related to Safe Routes to School equity that you are proud of, and what in particular made that effort successful. So we want to spend about half the time thinking about wins, and then about half of the time thinking about challenges and opportunities for improvement. So what challenges do you or your peers experience when it comes to keeping equity at the forefront of your work? And if time or capacity are the things that are coming up for you, we want to dive into that a little bit more and think about why those are, your sort of stumbling blocks when it comes to equity. And then what resources could support you and your peers and other practitioners and community members in understanding equity and addressing some of the challenges that have been coming up in your communities. So that's what we'll be chatting about in our breakout groups.
Great. Yeah, and I'm just going to jump into room 3 once we open them. I set the timer for 10 minutes. And we'll jump out now. All right, well, I'm going to share my screen here just because I have those questions up. One second. Everybody see the questions? Great. So does anybody want to start us off? What effort kind of are you proud of in this work here? We have a quiet bunch.
I'll start us off.
All right.
I just finished up writing a plan for Lakefield, and their big project, the number one project that they identified, was also the top equity project. So it was, they're building a new middle school next to the elementary school right along a highway, and the entire south side of town where many people live and where there's, I guess, higher poverty levels. There's no direct route. You have to do this long circuitous route to get to the school. So minimum of 6 blocks to get there. Whereas they want to build a trail that would go right to the south side that would make it a 2-block effort instead of a 6-block effort. And so, and the city already owns the land that they would use. It just goes along a creek. So they really want to try and get something together for a TAP grant this year. So that's their top priority, and it also addressed all their equity issues. Well, not all, but their biggest.
Awesome. I guess I think it kind of helps to just piggyback it. What do you think made that successful?
I would say it helped doing the walk audit, being able to talk to people and go over to that side and see how much less infrastructure was over there than the rest of the area, which is actually very good. So there were not many needs infrastructure wise surrounding the immediate school area. But once you went to that south side, the fact that you had to go a long ways around, and once you're there, there's almost no sidewalk infrastructure or anything for biking or anything else. I thought it was a glaring contrast that once they visually saw it and experienced it, made it so that it was a top priority for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so important to have that on the ground view of what it's actually like to get to a space. But the rest of folks, any kind of efforts that you're proud of over the last few years?
I can pop on here. Michelle Kiefer with Bike MN, and the piece of Safe Routes to School that involves education for our schools and communities regarding what Safe Routes is about and what it looks like to provide education opportunities for community and schools, and the tools that we have on our tool belt for the education is the Walk Bike Fun program. And it has been successful for numerous years. And that is due to the partnerships that we have with many different organizations across the state, from regional planners such as Russell to Jill, allowing and inviting short updates in the network call to Dave, providing the promotion and marketing on the e-newsletters, and the SHIP coordinators that also know about the program and use that to help schools know that, when they're working on the E of education and safe routes to school plans, that the Walk Bike Fun program could help with that and does help with that. So I appreciate all of the partnerships that go into providing education and the tool of Walk Bike Fun for communities and schools. And then with that, in the past few years, it's been building the response of equity into the program, and how can we reach those populations of different races and income levels and abilities and disabilities into the program, and helping to meet the needs of all of those populations for implementing the Walk Bike Fun program. So I'm proud of how far the program has come. I'm proud of the partnerships that have been involved in making it successful. And I, hope to keep those relationships going, and I feel confident that we will.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing.
And
I think that
I'm going to piggyback off of Michelle, just because I what popped into my head in particular was the curriculum. And one reason, in addition to everything Michelle just said, another reason it's been successful, I think the way Michelle in particular, but other folks involved, they just keep iterating. And it's never been, no, we can't do it. We have to wait till it's perfect to launch, but launch it and try some things, and what's working, what's not working, or who's not reaching. And I just think about the work that went into making it more inclusive, especially with students that live with disability. And it's not done yet, but it's added so many more layers. And that just keep coming and realizing you can always improve upon something. And the way you did it last year may have been the best way you could do it then, but and I think that's been something that has benefited Safe Routes.
awesome.
I'm going to jump in here and say that many of the communities we work with in Northeast Minnesota aren't racially diverse. And so oftentimes we hear of equity and we think, oh, it's about that. It's about making sure that people are included in that way, and different cultural backgrounds are all included. But just going into communities and having the conversations about what does equity look like in your community? I think that's a really important question to pose to these smaller northern Minnesota communities that aren't looking at equity in the same way that we see portrayed in the national media. So having those introductory conversations is, I guess, something that I think of a lot, and what it means for a community like Grand Marais that's almost 100% white and that sort of thing. And I think even those are big things and big accomplishments as we kind of dive into this.
I'm just curious, what's a big thing that you commonly hear when you ask that in a space that's 100% white, and what does equity mean to you in your community?
Mostly blank stares and, oh, that's a good question. And I think that's, even if we don't get an answer, at least people walk away from the conversation thinking about what that means. And I see that we have 58 seconds here, but I will say that some things are one-parent households that grandparents are raising the children, even geographic areas of town that socioeconomically are lower than other areas. So it looks different everywhere.
Great, thanks so much. 30 seconds. Does anyone have a quick shout? Otherwise, I think you all gave so much great experience here, from the infrastructure needs through experiential learning, from the education tools and how it kind of takes a village of coordination to really positing these questions of equity, even in places that aren't racially diverse. I think this is all very great. So thank you.
Eric, I don't know if those breakout groups still are organized the way that you had them, but I think we were able to get to the first question in our group and would love another 10 minutes to tackle that second question. Are you able to split us up again?
I think if I just hit it again, it should throw us back into the same ones. Let me double check.
I really like coming back from breakout groups because everybody has their camera on and it feels very
Suddenly you see how many
community-like.
people are here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
What do we think? If I hit recreate, will it put them back up? Or if I just I think if I just click open all rooms, it'll put us back to where we were.
Let's go ahead and do that.
Thanks,
All right,
Eric.
ready to jump
Thank
back and
you.
ask the next question?
Yep.
Sounds good. All right. So I think we can go ahead and ask our next question. What challenges do you or your peers experience in keeping equity at the forefront of your work? And then what resources could support you in addressing these challenges?
I think my main challenge kind of goes along with what Russell was saying, in that just defining what it means beyond race and language is the biggest barrier. So they don't think about all the other things that are a piece of equity. So this next round, I'll know to be bringing that up at the very first meeting instead of waiting until those later ones when we're trying to brainstorm goals and action steps to address it. Because we did 3 plans this year, and in all of them, they really struggled to actually pull out what the equity goals or pieces would be. I had to really lead them there based on things they'd already said when talking about the other areas. So I think just defining it and making it central to the discussion, I think is the biggest challenge, because my area is also predominantly white, except for a couple communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a big challenge, because equity, I think, is new to a lot of the planning conversations that we're having here in the St. Cloud area, and defining what that means, and kind of collectively figuring out how to best respond to that challenge of making sure that there's equitable access and opportunity. It's a good conversation to be starting, and I think that it's kind of new. So the challenge is to kind of get that conversation started.
Yeah, like folks have said, it's a hard conversation to start, especially in an area that doesn't really think that equity is something that their community faces. So broadening that conversation. How about the second part of this, if folks are a little stuck, like what resources could support you in addressing these challenges? Is there like more of a toolkit, or different ways to kind of start these conversations that folks feel like they're missing?
Someone else go. I'm holding back.
Yeah, I'd say definitely if there's tools out there to help communicate what we're talking about when we refer to equity, and how it has a lot of different meanings, and it's not just ethnicity. It goes. There's a lot of aspects to it, and yeah, I've seen kind of illustrations of what equity means, and illustrations I think would be helpful. Other information as well. I don't know what all is available, but definitely, yeah.
Absolutely. You were going to say, Joe?
I was going to say what has been helpful with some of the work, and this is more from the perspective of as we've tried to center health equity and now racial equity within Blue Cross. And, you know, in the corporate space, sometimes it's like, well, no, but we give these rules and here's how we operate by them. But again, it's two things. It's one, getting comfortable with difference. And I think some people, I think a lot of us will be like, no, I'm okay with somebody being different. Like, but then when it changes how you may do some of your work, or it brings about some changes, I know I can get defensive or feel like, well, are you telling me I did it wrong? And just, you can feel a rigidity come in. And so like anything we're doing that shores up how we navigate change and how we navigate difference and conflict. Not that equity instinctively means conflict or that there will be conflict, but I come from a fairly expressive family that will talk, like, we're going to talk, we're going to cut each other off, we're going to be in there. And my husband comes from, he's half Finnish, and they have long conversation in pauses. And it is a magical thing to, so it's like understanding that neither of those are wrong, but they are different. And like, if you're trying to get on the same page, and I think when we get into equity, and we hear a lot especially with greater Minnesota, about there's not diversity is different than say in the Twin Cities, and yes. And we also see changing demographics. I mean, you see like when a large employer is a meat packing plant and the employees are primarily Latino or Somali, they're like, people are there, and there are these differences and changes, and just like understanding what that looks like, understanding it just like somebody may have very different cultural practices, and like that's like getting to know those. So I think that's part of the experience. And so we've been grappling with it, and it's not easy, and it's not a one and done. You're trying to figure things out and share, understand each other.
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing you right, you're kind of saying that it's kind of hard to have these conversations about difference because people immediately get on edge and feel like this is going to be conflict. People don't really want to talk about difference because they feel like there's a judgment factor there. Mm-hmm. But then also people dealing with the changing demographics in greater Minnesota and maybe not having some of those conversations about what that means and kind of conversing with those folks.
Just muted myself. Even as I use the phrase changing demographics, like that phrase is controversial that's like, as we are getting into these discussions about like some of the culture wars, right? Or, it's like, it's a way, it can be a trigger phrase to get somebody feel like, well, the way that we, the things I love about my town are going away. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily like what that means, but it's that we're always, I don't know, I'm going to break into song too, because I also watched In the Heights and I loved it. And it's about like how a block changes. So I got to stop talking. You guys are supposed to be in this group. I'm just extra. Sorry.
I'll take on to that, Jill, because I think that is one, kind of harking back to the first question here. That is one of the things that is a challenge, is when you hear a certain phrase or a certain word like equity or changing demographics, there are certain connotations that come with that, for better or worse, and so kind of getting over those. And to Fred's point, I think for that reason, maybe an illustration that better pushes what equity is into the Safe Routes to School world would be really helpful, because we have a lot of illustrations about what equity looks like. We have the little bikes and we have the little boxes and the fence with the baseball field. But I know personally, those don't really speak to me. Like it makes sense as an illustration generally, but when it comes to Safe Routes to School, it kind of is hard to make the leap and to see how that can translate over. So demystifying some things and better illustrations.
I absolutely know the illustration you're talking about with the baseball where everyone's standing on the crates, and
my question is, what if people don't want to watch the baseball game?
Nobody wants to watch the baseball.
But going to school is a different ball game, if I'm going to mix my metaphors.
Oh, everybody's got to go.
I think I just want to make a point about the words we use. And I think sometimes equity could, if you start off leading with that word, could set off all those political type of ramifications that are bad. I work a lot in energy. So for example, in Southwest Minnesota, I do a lot with renewable energy and efficiency, et cetera, but I never use the word climate change down here. I'll talk about changing weather patterns and droughts and things, but I'll never use climate change because immediately you get lots of pushback from that. But they'll easily agree with, hey, this makes it more efficient and makes it so that I save money. So I talk about saving money and changing weather patterns and extreme events. And I get to the same place, but I itemize the things that are real to their experience versus using whatever the catch-all term or buzzword or political term is. And I think we could do something like that with equity as well. Break it down into its components that people can reflect on and relate to.
I really like that, Jason. Yeah, it's finding the right words that make the most sense to people to have the conversation.
No, absolutely. That's great. We'll see you guys in the big group here.
Here comes everybody.
Luke, as folks join, one thing that I was saying before we jumped out was that if a way you said youth have are engaged in a lot of sports.
Oh God, yeah, they are.
And there was a colleague who did engagement with the youth track team to like run routes and give feedback. So there's just a small idea.
I'll put that in my notes. Every year, it started a few years ago now, at the end of the school year for Jackson County Central, they have a fun run, at the end. So elementary students run with various older kids and parents that want to participate. They run like a mile or a mile and a half around the school. So that's not a bad idea with the track kids. I'm going to make a note of that. I'm going to put track. Okay.
Cross country is a good one too, because they usually run very long routes. I've gotten some good feedback at various community events from them.
Of course, they're the group that can run the distance. Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody. It looks like we've got everyone. I know we're running up on the end of the hour. We're hoping, I think, to do a little bit of group sharing, but we have notes that we've taken, so we'll just make sure we get all of those after the call. I want to thank all of you for sharing your experiences and being a little bit vulnerable with us, probably in the breakout groups. Just to wrap up, I want to share some quick next steps. So our team will be compiling what was shared in those breakout groups. And since 20 minutes was not nearly enough time to cover everything related to equity and safe routes to school, we are also planning to develop a survey that asks some similar questions and some other things as well, to help us better understand those needs and resource opportunities. So we'll share that to Dave, who will get it out to you. And if you're able to share it with your Safe Routes networks locally too, that would be really wonderful. That will help us focus our efforts. And then, of course, if you want to be involved in that equity work group, please let Dave know, and we can get you involved in those 2 work group meetings. So you will have a chance to help really inform and review and develop the resources that will be developed between now and October. And then, of course, once those resources are developed, it would be a big help if you could use them and share them and distribute them amongst the partners that you work with locally on Safe Routes to School. So that's all we've got. I'm gonna stop sharing and pass it back to Dave and Eric for any final words.
We had a little other piece we were going to do today. I think we'll bump it to the next one, but I'm just in our own conversation, we heard so much good stuff. So I'm really excited to see some of this compiled and kind of the takeaways here, because I absolutely loved our conversation. I hope y'all got a lot out of yours as well. But I just want to thank y'all for your time. I think this has been a really great meeting. Dave, do you have anything else before we call it?
I have nothing to add.
All right. Well, thank you all for participating today. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.